Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to SA Accounting Academy. Here's a short clip on one of our previous webinars. I hope that you really do enjoy it.
This is a webinar titled Introduction to Cryptocurrencies, which I will be presenting the first part of. I'll get into my introduction shortly. Joining me is Shenaaz Suleman, who is a partner at BDO, who will take over in the second half and go into more detail around accounting for cryptocurrencies. So by way of introduction, my name is Andoni Nicolau. I'm the head of digital assets at Geltec, and I've been personally in the cryptocurrency space since around about 2016, initially in my individual capacity, and then since joining Geltec, been building and leading the team there to market regulated investment products specifically aimed at digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. So I'm just going to turn off my camera and jump straight into the meat of today's course and presentation. So what are we going to discuss today? First and foremost, I'd like to touch on the properties of money, what money is. I think without an understanding of money, it's very difficult to understand what cryptocurrencies are and what role they're going to play in our economy or in an investor's portfolio. So that is step one, just a little bit of a foundation on money. Module 2 is going to look at what is blockchain. So technically, what actually are cryptocurrencies? What is the infrastructure that underpins them? How do they actually work? How do they actually function? Then we will jump into what the investment opportunities are. So why is it important that we understand this new asset class? And why do we need to consider it for our investment portfolios? And then lastly, I'm going to discuss what the current regulation and tax treatment is in South Africa. And then we'll also look at what we think is going to develop in the future, specifically from the regulators and how they will handle cryptocurrencies moving forward. Right, so jumping straight into it, Module 1, the properties of money. And again, I think this is a very important topic because it is not very well studied at schools and university. It's kind of just glossed over, and people simply take for granted that governments and central banks control our money and we can rely on them. But I think cryptocurrencies have emerged specifically because there's a need for there to be more competition in the money market. So we're going to look at how money has evolved. There's thousands and thousands of years of very, very interesting monetary history and thousands of different monies that have emerged and collapsed. And we'll come all the way up to today to understand how we got to where we are with our current monetary system. And then we'll look at what the basic functions and characteristics of money are. So it might seem a bit murky at first, but when you break it down into the functions and characteristics of money, it actually becomes quite clear as to why certain economies adopt certain monies and why some are more useful than others. Okay, so looking at the history and the evolution of money, the generally accepted view is that early Homo sapien tribes used barter to do business with one another. If I needed shelter, I would exchange a cow for some housing materials. And of course, that's very inefficient, and it's very difficult to actually do economic calculations and reach agreements when transacting. And so out of that problem, the technical term is a coincidence of wants and needs, because if the person who creates my housing materials doesn't actually need a cow or doesn't need fish, then I can't get those materials unless I have what that person wants. So you need a coincidence of wants or needs. And as you can imagine, that's very, very inefficient, and we don't see it in today's economy at all. Money is the main lubricant for trade and commerce. So out of that problem, society developed the idea of money. And initially what they used were different objects that simply occurred in nature. So commodity type monies. There's examples of early societies that used salt as money. There's examples of seashells being used as money, glass beads in West Africa. there really is a very long and rich history of different types of money that have been used by different tribes and different societies. And then for very specific reasons, each of those monies eventually lost their value as a unit of trade. And we'll touch on that when we look at what the characteristics of a good money will be. And for very specific reasons, those goods stopped being used as money, and we moved on into the next evolution, that being gold and metal money. So silver at a stage was used as money, copper has been used as money, but ultimately where the world settled on was gold. And the reasons for that is that gold is the hardest form of money that exists in our economy. It's the scarcest of the metals. As I said, silver and copper were also used as money and also compete as money. But gold was the unit that the world settled on, and eventually we moved on to a gold standard, which the global economy traded on for close to 100 years. Moving on from the gold standard, we then developed paper money. Initially, based on the gold standard, paper had to be printed based on the quantities of gold that was held in the vault. And now we are moving into the digital realm where we use digital money. It's also important to understand that digital money didn't just arise with cryptocurrencies. We've been using digital money since the early 80s. And ever since banks made it possible to transact over a digital network and using servers to move those balances around, that was the beginning of digital money. Cryptocurrencies is essentially the next evolution of that development in the monetary network. Okay, so moving on. Now, what are the basic functions that any money needs to perform? Again, these are pretty obvious and pretty self-explanatory when we break them down into these three functions. First and foremost, money needs to carry value. So it has to act as a store of value. Over time, it might lose value or it might gain value, but at any point in time, it needs to hold some amount of value. Secondly, it needs to be a medium of exchange. If I'm unable to transact my store of value with somebody else to exchange it for some type of good or service, then it fails at being a medium of exchange, and it's not very useful as a money in the economy. And then lastly, the final function of a money, and not all monies perform this function, is as a unit of account. Now, generally, the money that gets used as a unit of account is the money that is most widely accepted in the economy. So, for example, in South Africa, we denominate our assets and liabilities in ZAR. ZAR is legal tender. We pay our debts with the rand. We essentially keep track of our wealth in the ZAR as our unit of account. Now, globally speaking, the dollar serves as the global reserve currency, and that acts as the unit of account for the vast majority of global commerce. So store of value, medium of exchange are two most essential functions of a money. And then lastly, the most ubiquitous form of money tends to act as a unit of account. Right, now looking at what are the characteristics that make money either strong or weak, and why have we seen certain monies disappear and other monies become more popular and more widespread and more widely used. And again, we can look at very simple examples because most of these are all self-explanatory. So money needs to be scarce, needs to be divisible, you need to be able to transport it, it needs to be, you need to be able to verify it, and it needs to be durable. And I think the best way to think about these characteristics is just to come up with one or two everyday examples that really makes it obvious as to why we use certain kinds of money. So I mentioned earlier that gold became very popular, and we lived on a gold standard for many, many years. But today, hardly anyone uses gold in their day-to-day ongoings. So the best example of that is if I need to go down the road to Pick and Pay or Checkers and I need to buy my groceries, it's very difficult for me to whip out a Kruger Rand or a bar of gold and divide it into the specific amount that I need to spend for my groceries. Let's say the value is 500 Rand, and then receive my change and go home with my groceries. So gold is very, very clunky. It's not easily divisible, and it's not easy to transport over long distances.
I hope that you enjoyed that video. For more of our webinar videos, go to www.accountingacademy.co.za. Thank you and have a lovely day.